Hello. Today, we're doing a deep dive on the Warlock skill that is unintuitive, yet has a lot of depth. Of course, I'm talking about Miasma Chain. Now, some people say that this skill is glitchy or clunky, and honestly, they're right. But in the right hands, it can be a powerhouse of a skill. So, let's just dive in. Let's begin with a brief overview of the skill here. So, the skill's got two parts to it when you cast it. The first part has the Warlock throw out a chain projectile towards the cursor. The projectile will fly out until it reaches a wall, a map object, an enemy, or when it finally reaches where the cursor was upon cast. When it stops, it creates a chain connection and releases miasma clouds between the connection and the Warlock. The cloud spawns are random but mostly consistent throughout the chain. Clouds only spawn once a connection has been made, not when the chain is still a projectile. It lasts around 2 seconds, but this can be further extended with the enhanced entropy passive. You could have multiple miasma chains active, and the skill does have a short cooldown to it. Alright, now let's get into the nitty gritty about this skill. So the chain's connection can break under certain conditions, and that's pretty much when it collides with things like a map object or a wall, or if you get too far away from that chain anchor connection point, yeah, it'll just break. And it will also, unfortunately, break if you have a connection and cast Blade Warp. So for walls, there can be some nuance to them. Some walls can be self-explanatory, like for structures, but for ruins, like in Act 2 or 5, they can have a low portion to them where you can create and maintain a chain connection, but at the same time, other parts of the wall that look similar don't allow this, and they will either stop the projectile or break existing connections. So overall, these walls are not really consistent and should just be avoided. As for map objects, things like trees, some taller bushes in Act 3, and pillars will generally break the chain. And when I say pillars, think of just taller map objects like pillars in Arcane Sanctuary, or that there's a couple in Act 5. It will take some practice to understand what will break the connection in terms of map objects. Now, we do need to discuss easily the most frustrating thing about Miasma Chain, and that's the fact that for some reason, the skill just won't cast to your cursor. It'll land right at your feet, even though there's nothing in the way that it should collide with. It just kind of randomly happens in some locations. It's almost like there's an invisible wall that's preventing the projectile from going, and I've found that this can happen sometimes when the line of sight can be questionable, like if you're casting it too close to a wall, or it can just happen literally out of nowhere. And this really sucks. Fix this, Blizzard. Next, let's go over what Miasma Chain can be cast through, slash what it can maintain connections through. So this includes torches, like the ones that you find next to waypoints, weapon racks or chests, lootable corpses, things like that. We've got shrines, holes in Arcane Sanctuary, and by holes I mean just the in between the paths there. We've got rivers in Acts 3, 4, and 5, those type of things. We've got stones in Stony Field. You can, even though it's like a taller object, yeah, Miasma Chain can just go right through it. And here's an interesting one. It can go through stairs. So, like stairs that you go up and down with at Arcane Sanctuary, or Act 4 bridges, and Act 2 stairs. But with the Act 2 stairs, it should be worth noting that like the L shape that it has sometimes can actually break the chain. So let's talk a little bit about Blade Warp, because this skill's got some unique interactions with Miasma Chain. When Blade Warp is cast, it will cause Miasma Chain to just fail. This includes the first projectile part of Miasma Chain and breaking any existing connections. Now, this seems unique to Blade Warp. I haven't seen any other skill cause the first projectile part to just fail. But if you cast Blade Warp first, and then Miasma Chain, the skill won't fail. So it is possible to use Blade Warp with Miasma Chain. But you'll have to consider a couple things, like you'll need enough airtime on your Blade Warp, and you're going to need enough FCR to cast these spells in quick succession, and a little bit of practice. I'm going to say it again, but Blizzard, please fix this. Blade Warp should not cause Miasma Chain to fail, especially because teleport, for whatever reason, doesn't behave like that. You can teleport and existing chains won't break, and it also doesn't cause the first projectile portion of Miasma Chain to fail. It's important to note the other ways of connections breaking when using Blade Warp and Teleport, because in classic Blizzard fashion, it doesn't make any sense. For example, Miasma Chain will actually go through trees and map objects if you teleport or Blade Warp through the object. This doesn't seem to be true for walls though. The chain will still break here. I think it mostly depends on where you land. So if you teleport through something that breaks line of sight, you're okay as long as your teleport or Blade Warp destination still has line of sight. Another important thing to note is that after you teleport or Blade Warp, when the Miasma Chain is traveling back to you, the Miasma Chain is not spawning clouds during that time. Essentially, think of this skill as requiring line of sight in order to maintain the chain connection. And with this being said, let's talk a little bit more miscellaneous things regarding this skill. If a connection has been made on an enemy and the enemy dies, the connection is maintained from where the enemy died. But it's worth noting that the chained enemy does not take any direct damage from the chain, as we can see from this Fallen running while it has a chain connection. The chained enemy can actually still take damage, but just from the miasma clouds that the chain spawns. Enhanced Entropy helps a lot with this because of the larger cloud radius. Alright, now let's get into some tips and tricks about this skill. So, when using Miasma Chain, this projectile seems to have a little bit of width to it. So, in order to get the chain to consistently go where you want it to go, try to be generous when trying to give the chain room to not break or get caught on things. Now, of course, in order to get the most out of this skill, you're going to want to invest in the Miasma Chain itself, as well as its synergies and Enhanced Entropy. Enhanced Entropy is great because it makes the skill last significantly longer, so definitely don't skip that ever for this skill. That being said, you're going to have plenty of points left over, and I would recommend the Demon Tree because you've got things like Consume, Bind, and even the Defiler is a really good skill to have. Blade Warp would be the only thing you want out of the Eldritch Tree. Alright, now, in regards to tactics with using the Miasma Chain, you ultimately want to have the Miasma Chain connection between you and your enemies. So let's talk a little bit about creating the best case scenario with this skill. So we cast Miasma Chain and then want to get the Miasma Chain between the enemies. Now running, teleport, or Blade Warp are great ways to do this. But remember, with Blade Warp, you need to cast Blade Warp first and then Miasma Chain, with enough FCR. Like here, for example, boom, instant cookage. Rift can be really good to make a good line for Miasma Chain, or to group enemies up. Now that when enemies are cooking, now's the perfect time to use Rift, Miasma Bolt, and potentially more Miasma Chains for a quicker killing time. The most satisfying Miasma Chains, though, are when you don't have to move at all. For example, you cast Miasma Chain past the enemy group, and then you rift the group into the chain. And of course, we can't forget the fact that this skill lingers for a while, especially when you've got Enhanced Entropy. So, similar to like Meteor from the Sorceress, you can line up multiple chains if you know an enemy is going to be in a specific location to just completely nuke them So this includes things like Diablo spawn, or Balewave spawn, or even if like an extra fast monster is running towards you, if you've got a connection in their line, they're gonna get cooked. Something else to note is that the connection breaking isn't always a bad thing, because when a connection is already made, it is spawning the clouds, and those clouds linger. But of course, I do think it's like best to try to maintain the connection so you're still spawning those clouds and pumping out more damage. Although Miasma Chain can feel clunky, it can deal some very respectable damage. I like this skill because it feels different compared to anything else we've had in Diablo 2, and it's very strong and it rewards smart play. On the other hand, I'm not a fan of Miasma Chain just failing and the connection just being made right next to the Warlock's feet for no reason. I really just want Blizzard to fix it. Alright, and a message to my fellow subscribers: I'm back, and I will be uploading again. I missed doing this, and I missed you guys, and yeah, it feels good to be back. However, due to burnout on Diablo 2, I think I'm going to start uploading things other than Diablo 2. Would you stick around? Let me know. Thanks for watching. Peace.